Gosh, it's an honor to be here. I thank Miles for inviting me, and Susan and Jennifer and everyone else who's helped with all of us, help all of us do what we came here hoping to do. It's been great for me. I'm reading from Last Lake with a couple of other additions, so here's the first one. I promised myself, here's a clock, perfect. This is from a sequence of poems which was written as a series of meditations on the words self and soul in that poem by Yeats. This is one of them. Soul, the word, is ancient from Old English. Self, the word, is older, Indo-European. The sound of either word can span an eon and revivify the history of a wish. A mortal man or woman composed of self and soul, or thought and act, or guest and host. A mortal man or woman, not a god and not a beast, must live a question. Questioning. Can weep with happiness, can excruciate, can nullify or sanctify, or both, can turn and honoring the dust of all creation, can create, may dance when lame, and even mute may sing, and can howl when well, and laugh when ill, love when in pain, and in pain, love still. My mother's parents came to this country in 1900 from what was then called Russian Poland. And my grandmother was my first babysitter. This is called Canasta. Houston, 1953. But it doesn't begin there. It begins in the place she left behind and what happened there. Masses of one unhoused household added to another, all abandoned and made to abandon their names. A non-colonnade of gray clods, an unquadrangle of neo-rational obliteration, an arcade of ashes. Ditch-buried hordes of kin left akimbo, a strangled necropolis on the verge of the farthest acres of the settled precincts of our planet, or maybe at the corner angle of the poisoned field of remembrance. Only one little creaking shed. And in the low gray corner inside, a weak tangle of the last echoes of a last word that ever was uttered to a beloved child, or of that child's reply. I know how to play, I said to my grandmother. I lied, so wanting to be included and interrupting her card game in America, the card table, the discard, the talk in their language, the tea, no more than a decade after all that hate-whipped grief without a shroud. Her 3 card-playing women friends, as displaced as she, did not, I remember this, like to be interrupted. It might be too much for me to say I understand that what they did, their canasta and bridge, their mahjong, they did so as, even then, not to be destroyed. And they went out together too, converged with fellow theosophists and singers, and even tramped off in pants to a mossy, snaky wood to see a migrating bird. If, as I stood near the card game, my grandmother reached and touched my head, I'm saying if she did, I don't remember that she did. Her own youngest son had gone all the way back there to be killed in that war. If touch me she did, it might have been because I, her blood descendant, but knowing nothing, could not have restored to her for 1 second, even if unwittingly I could have touched her with the grace of a small child. I could not have restored 1 iota, as she used to say, of the world that had been obliterated, world she never once mentioned. Oh, that's okay. Well, this one's rather gloomy too. But you can get into gloom. There are a lot of rich words for that. This is the one that Sally mentioned, a veteran. If you could see my own copies, my sort of working copies of my own books, you would see that there are revisions in them. This one has a little one. My father came down not killed from among others, killers or killed, for whom he'd worn a uniform, and he lived along afterward, a steady man on the flattest of plains. I called after him many times, surprised when I heard the catch in my own voice. He didn't know how to find the solace of listening to someone else speak of what he'd seen and survived. He himself closed his own mouth against his own words. In the wrong sequence, his spirit, then his mind, and last his body, crossed over that infamous peat inky metaphorical water that has no far shore. I think he was carried like a leaf in currents so gentle that a duckling, had it been alive, could have braved them, but too strong for a leaf. And saturated with minerals that steadily replaced organic cells, the water turned my father, an ex-soldier, to leaf-delicate stone inscribed with the names of all his losses. More than one person in my workshop had a Civil War poem, and that resonated for me, so this is a little one. It's part of a sequence also. It's part of that self and soul sequence. It's called Bright Candlelight. This is probably 1864 or so, and it's probably in Georgia. Since I sort of made it up, I don't really know. I mean, I didn't make up the kind of thing that happens in it. Waving his saber, a rider takes porch steps with uproar and clatter, steel-shod hooves on wood. He must lean down to enter on his horse and spurs it hard. Then, standing in his stirrups with groaning swing, he cuts down the glowing candle chandelier. It crashes, bleeds out slowly like a man, not a thing. Not in a way that one could stench. Outside, a kestrel on a branch at rest, digesting a green lizard. Horses won't go down steps. In the vestibule, what had been wondrously handmade by worn-out men, dark-skinned, lies shattered underfoot. The blade is sheathed. The rider has to get the horse and his soul out, clear of hazard. And Lincoln studies a map, goes inch by inch. This is more playful, but in a gloomy way. I like that. This is from another sequence. It's long. It's called Dark Honey. All the poems in it are written, as I say in the underneath the title, from and for the Russian poet Osip Mandelstam. One of them, which I'll read to you, is just a translation of one of his poems, and others come out of images. Here's this one. The cranium dome hangs from its own thread of virtual pale light, conceiving its exercises of inventiveness. I should have said in another poem here, Hagia Sophia, the church, the Byzantine church that was turned into a mosque. That's the dome he was thinking of, and that's the one I'm sort of thinking. I'll start it again. But he says cranium. This is his figure. The cranium dome hangs from its own thread of virtual pale light, conceiving its exercises of inventiveness, its own associative super supremo conductivity, its color wheel of lucid and lulu, its murk and murder, worthy and woo-woo heterodoxies, its Zeno, its Zeus, its Dante, its Te Deums and freak shows, frescoes, twine theory, money, bread, bricks, wine, sex, six-syllable abstractions, axes, and genetic ingenuities of custom, including kisses, grammar, the vertical graves of men buried upside down without their heads. We've thought of everything. This is the first poem in the sequence. In the rainy subtropics of my childhood, hoarse latitudes of sleep, of handmade wishes, I would try to dream of snowfields. But they failed to become real as I lay on my sweaty sheet after we'd all been outside late among the invisible heat giants trampling the unbreathable dusk. The sun gone down behind the chinaberry trees of our gunman back neighbor had left on the mute bulging stratosphere its faint pledge never to fail us. I wished and imagined it would fail us just once. Give me a chance. I'd take our one horse, ride in the broad midday darkness far away. I'm going to read two translations. This one is Marina Tsvetaeva. The poem was written in 1922. She wrote a lot about God. I don't do that. So as a translator, I can inhabit it a bit. And you'll see that even in English, it's pretty amazing. I've been translating these poems and poems by other Russian poets for more than 10 years with a Russian poet who's a colleague of mine, Ilya. This is the third of three poems to God, just called God. Oh, you won't tie him down to omens or dumbbells. Through the tiniest of keyholes, he'll slip away, a gymnast, so slim. Like drawbridges divorcing, like birds immigrating, like sound through wires, God departs. Oh, you can't lock him up inside your life, your fate. In the mud season of our moods, God is white-headed river ice going out. Oh, him you won't domesticate. In a saucered flower pot like some slow-growing pet begonia in a window, God thrives not. From beyond our domed roof, we awaited the voice and the architect, The poet and the pilot, high in the cosmos, despaired of ever finding him. He is runningness. He gods away. The little book of the stars, from A to Z, is only dust from his cloak. Yeah. That's her. That's not me. Yeah, it's like that, only better in Russian, I'm sure. Here's one on the same theme. This is Boris Pasternak. He mentions names that would have been known to all his readers, Jadwiga and Jagiello. This was a royal couple of the 1300s who, she was the Queen of Poland. And since she married Władysław Jagiello, if I'm saying that right, and he became a king. They were co-monarchs. And because she was Catholic and he was Orthodox, it was celebrated as a kind of meeting of different views of God. But this is, they're mentioned. It's not really where this is, but you'll see it is kind of where it is. Let's let words fall. And how can I resist that? Let's let words fall, the zest yellow and amber of trees, distractedly, yet lavishly. This one, and these. It doesn't matter why all these leaves have been sprinkled so ceremoniously with lemon and madder. Who is it that drips tears from pine needle tips and flows between fence rails and slips through the window blind to light the score on the music stand? Who, with rowan berries, hennaed my black doormat with a handful of beautiful, trembling red italics? You may ask, who gives to August the command to be so regal, for whom nothing is too small, who can so precisely chisel every leaf of every maple, who since the days of Ecclesiastes has never ceased his carving in marble and alabaster? You may ask, who commands the lips of Dahlia and Aster to suffer so in September? By whose order do burnt yellow leaves of laburnum fall a second time from gray caryatids down to the damp pavements of the infirmaries of autumn? You may ask, who commands? The Almighty God of abundant detail, the Almighty God of abundant love, of every Jadwiga and Jagiello. I don't know if the riddle of the darkness after death is decipherable, but life, like autumnal tranquility, is detailed to the infinitesimal. And this is Last Lake. That cold time before, she and I could still drink the clear river water, reaching a tin cup over the side of the canoe. The next year, where we put in, people were talking of Giardia, and 2 days out, we paddled by a whole moose carcass left in the water the previous autumn to rot. Hunters from elsewhere had taken only the head. Straining to beat the dark under a low sun, still hot, we were moving upstream on the hushed waterway. We turned into an unnamed tributary, then into another, wishing we had learned in some village 1,000 years before our birth a song for our paddle strokes that we could have sung back softly to the rippling current that was whispering to us. She in the bow, me in the stern, a week's supplies between us. To an osprey, we were more and more inconvenient as we approached, flashing reflections from our paddles. We wished not to annoy it, but needed to go on. It leapt up from a bare 80-foot pine top and flew upriver to another high branch that sagged under it, and it folded its great black-wristed wings again and again stared sharply down its late day, watching for a fish. But again we ruined its chances, apologizing as we paddled toward it. Forced to another such stage of retreat, it up and winged over us, away to another river it knew. All of us have never stopped building and becoming the things that no osprey can get over. In the thick woods on the upsloping bank, a steep, narrow beaver slide. A young black bear coming down it scoots into sight on its behind, then sees us so near that it thrashes the underbrush as it spins around and escapes back up the bank fast. In 4 days, we made 3 portages. All that heavy human stuff that we carried, loads of it in the cooler, and then the empty, heavy canoe. Drank something very cold after each time, having started with a block of ice so big, only 1 beer, 1 soda, and the bacon would fit beside it. We arrived at a wide reach of tall wild rice, standing 2 feet high above the water with a few grains at the top of each stalk. Rich wildflower green, and this water is so slow and shallow, it looks still to us. A side pond filled with the flourishing rice. Yet there's one opening, 5 or 6 inches wide, among the crowding stems, and she and I turn into it, and we see that this too is a tributary. And we head up what will be, wherever it leads, our last leg of the day. A meandering water path through the green, leading toward wherever this tiniest of currents comes from. We keep the nose of the canoe in that narrow snaking channel. And after 20 minutes of slow, quiet strokes, pushing down as gently as we can among the rice stems where our sliding plastic and aluminum paddles hiss against them and then bubble the water, we reach the source, almost a secret place, a tiny lake, a last one where nobody can hike in or make a ruckus with a motorboat. A pair of loons are in the water, as antediluvian as everything else. A good sign. It's late. Even at this high latitude, the summer sun is almost at the treetops. We stow our paddles and we sit still in the still canoe for a moment. We pick up our rods, adjust the line, reach back, cast the lures in 2 long arcs. The little splash sounds far away, and soon we hook 2 pike. Release the smaller one. Then paddle to shore at a great flat rock, and she stands and steps out of the bow, gets hold of the canoe. Then I stand and step forward and onto the rock, and we both haul the canoe halfway out. And as we do, one long, dull word comes from the keel. We get the tent up, toss sleeping bags and packs inside, set the lantern in, zip the mesh door shut, gather dry wood, build a fire. She fillets the pike, lays it crackling in the frying pan. I fling the remains out into the water. Crawfish, come eat them. Dark trees around this lake, almost a circle, maybe 200 feet wide, have repeated every sound we've made, but as a question. From the cooler, we retrieve the last beer and last soda, and we drain out the last melt of what had been our block of ice. 5 days since we put in. From here, we'll just work at it without the leisure of camp mornings, and we'll paddle back downstream in 2. Somewhere inside the low branch shadows of a tree that might be thinking about the end of its long, bright sun time. A hermit thrush offers everything it has of notes and trills, singing about now, now, now. Within the thick-grown, dark blue-green trees, almost black, that stand around the lake, leaning at it a little, and the thrush is an imagination, or one of them, in the woods, one mood of the woods, of a many-mindedness. Then the thrush goes quiet. It requires no such magnificence of us. Fried pike and canned green beans for dinner. You remember something from when we met. The evening's a memorial for whatever we want to put in it, or a promise. It seems eternal, and the frying pan gets scoured and turned upside down on the rock, and we hang the food duffel high up between two trees. We wash a little in the cold little lake. Everything's taken care of. The fire dies down. Last sparks fly and float up when she tows it. And suddenly the mosquitoes are on us like rain. It's their moment now. And we hurry into the tent. The only haste we've needed all day. One of the loons cries through the last of the twilight with what would be grief if we, not it, were to make that sound. But it's not. Then, dimly through the thin nylon of the tent and fly come wavering pale green veils of light high up in the north, moving like a being. For a while we watch through the mesh, this biggest thing that the human eye can get a sense of. I didn't say, but will now, that beyond our broad, flat, tilted rock in the thin dirt where we staked the tent, there was wild mint, and on the rock itself we found a ring of small stones already arranged to contain a campfire. When native men canoe in, the one in the bow will turn around and sit backwards, and they both catch the tall stems of the wild rice, bend them down across the canoe, and with a stick, they gently knock the ripe grains off the tops of them into the canoe and reach another armful in and brush that one and another and paddle a stroke and do it again and again and again, working the rice slowly. For this is slow work. When I think of all this now, I have to stop what I'm doing and saying in the midst of all the talk. I have to stop hearing all the mechanical and emotional noise around me, mine too. Behind my eyes, I feel such pressure of catastrophe and awe. Thank you.